2020 is finally over, which means that we can focus on making 2021 as positive as possible. And speaking of positivity, for today's video, I wanted to jump into some topics for the wild competitive Hearthstone scene and recommend what I would believe would revitalize the wild scene. So let's jump into what wild Hearthstone needs in 2021. The three main topics I want to cover are ladder incentive, competitive tournaments, and capitalizing wild similar to standard, which I will explain later in the video. Essentially, I believe Blizzard could utilize and model Wild Hearthstone competitively in order to not only bring themselves more profit, but more importantly provide an overarching goal and competitive incentive to bring as many people to the format as possible. And notice how I keep saying incentive, like there's just not a lot of reasons to really play the format unless you really love Wild Hearthstone. Aside from a few packs, some cards, and a slot on the Hearthstone leaderboards, there's really no real reason to shoot for top 200 legend in Wild Hearthstone. And when you look at the wild scene in China, they have streamed tournaments, active legend scenes, and more legend players in standard. And just they have a community that actively seeks to try and find meta breaker decks, which one of my favorite decks actually emerged from that scene. That'd be APM Druid. It's not really the most realistic deck, but regardless, like it's just another way that people are experimenting with the game, and I would love to see the same opportunities for the NA, EU, and APAC regions. So let's go ahead and dive into each topic individually. Number one is going to be ladder incentive. I believe a similar, regular occurring tournament for top wild players would be a fantastic way to revitalize the scene. We don't need anything too fancy like a Masters Tour, but a simple 64 or 128 person bracket would be a great start. The brackets could be double elimination or Swiss rounds, where players can compete for reasonable prize pools, potential stream highlights, as well as fame and glory. Furthermore, if things go well, maybe players can compete for invites to future tournaments to keep the competitive nature of Wild alive, which is really the main reason why I'm making this video. I want the competitive nature of the format to come back, because I honestly miss it. I'm not necessarily suggesting that they make something exactly like the Wild Open, but I believe that just some tournament to achieve for in the Wild scene is exactly what ladder players need, because they just haven't had a lot of incentive to play the game. Number two is competitive tournaments. As I said earlier, China not only has a wild competitive scene, but a tournament mode as well. As much as I'd love a tournament mode for the other regions, I can understand the barrier preventing Blizzard from accomplishing this. So instead of hammering in the idea of a tournament mode, I prepared some ideas that I would enact if I were the one in charge of the Blizzard wild competitive scene. If the capital allowed, my goal would be to create weekly and monthly tournaments and open cups for players of all skill levels. First being a low-stakes tournament series focused mainly on creating a welcoming scene for newer and budget players. The goal of this scene would be to prevent players from bringing meta decks from just like stomping newer players, because the whole reason that I'm suggesting this is to get people warmed up to the idea of Hearthstone tournaments, and if you're just going to have them get stomped by the best decks out in the meta, then that's just not going to create a very positive environment. So I believe if we create a tournament series for the players that don't necessarily have all the cards, it will incentivize them to maybe want to pick up the game even more. And that's really how my love of Hearthstone started, was going up against people with a similar skill level, figuring out the craziness of the game, and then slowly building up to those meta decks, and then actually understanding why the meta decks are so good. The second tournament idea would be a high-stakes tournament mode, where players who aren't able to reach the top levels of Legend can test their skills and practice their tournament lineups and strategies. So like I said earlier, if somebody's not able to reach the top 200, top whatever cutoff for the next idea that I'm going to suggest, then I like this idea for the player to be able to, do some practice open cups, do some simulations of a lineup that they're thinking of, so that way they can really get a good grasp of what they're doing correctly and what they need to improve on. I just think that having a practice tryhard mode is a good idea for players that are trying to improve their gameplay. Last but not least, I would love to see a tournament for the top Legend players. Blizzard could decide what they believe the appropriate cutoff for this, but just having some kind of regular occurring tournament like I was suggesting earlier would be a huge step in the right direction to try and bring more people to this competitive format. I really believe that just a few changes is all that's necessary in order to really bring people back. And now moving on to the final topic, number 3, capitalizing wild like standard. Simply put, I believe a wild GM system could be an amazing way to highlight the players that have been grinding in this format for so long. Obviously, this would be the hardest one to pull off, as they would need to be able to assemble casters, production. They would have to be able to create a qualification process to determine who the Wild GMs would even be, and all the other challenges that come with creating a large-scale competitive system of this nature. But I really believe it would do nothing but benefit Blizzard if they were able to execute this kind of system properly. They could easily stream these events on Twitch and on YouTube, and obviously there's a lot of controversy surrounding the switch over to YouTube, but I believe that since we haven't heard much from Hearthstone Esports yet on this new updates for 2021, I believe that one thing they're actually considering is being able to stream on Twitch, because I believe they are aware themselves that they have a larger reach on Twitch. Like, that just seems to be a given. But regardless, stream it on both Twitch and on YouTube to try and hit as many faces as possible, and I think that a Wild GM system could be very well received by the community. However, outside of the actual assembly of this kind of system, I would suggest instating a ban list if balance changes cannot be done. A reoccurring issue that I'm often noticing when it comes to balancing Hearthstone, and especially in Wild, is that Wild is ignored for the betterment of Standard. And just that can't be done if there's going to be a kind of Wild GM system. So case in point, Rigged Faire game is a great card example to provide a great nuance between the power levels of Standard and in Wild, because in Standard, this card doesn't even see any play in any deck whatsoever. Mage is kind of, one of the worst classes in the format, so it kind of makes sense. While in Wild, Secret Mage is one of the most busted archetypes, probably one of the top 5 decks easily, maybe some people's top 3, but regardless, Rigged Faire game in that deck is absolutely insane in combination with Cabal Lackey, to where you could just play it on turn 1 and easily draw 3 cards and have everything you need in order to tempo out and burn out your opponent. So if you're not able to nerf these cards for whatever reason, or if these cards become problematic, just create them in a ban list so that way people can't play them, and so other cards, like everyone's favorite 5-drop legendary, don't just be the only decks that we're seeing in these tournaments. And that's the main reason why I'm suggesting this kind of ban list, is so that way literally Raza Priest mirrors are not the only thing that we're seeing, or so players don't just have to immediately assume, oh yeah, gotta ban Raza Priest, because it would add a lot of variety to the decks that we see, because Wild is Wild after all. We don't just want to see the same archetypes over and over again. So if push came to shove, I believe that banning the problematic cards in the meta within reason could keep the system away from the flaws and the issues that plagues the ladder from time to time. And this kind of list could literally be created for every single tournament, like recreated, so that way you're not just putting the same cards on there, or like cards get, are always going to be on a ban list. And to be honest, if they're always going to be on this ban list, then they probably need a nerf regardless, right? Like, I'm thinking of that one card that kind of plagues the Wild meta, and just I don't want to see it in tournaments, please no. But there you go, those are my suggestions to give incentive to the Wild scene. Do you guys agree with these takes, and what would it take for you specifically to climb the Wild Hearthstone Legend ladder? I would love to hear your thoughts and debate you guys on these topics below in the comments, so feel free to let me know what you guys are thinking. After all, this is my very first video like this, so I may have some wrong takes, some wrong opinions, so if you guys have any kind of other ideas that you would like me to debate like this, like I said, I want to make more videos like this, then feel free to let me know in the comments below, and I'd love to chat with you guys. Until next time, feel free to check out some of the other combo videos that we've worked on, and we'll see you for the next video.